It's computer. Right. So I was just saying that I wanted to catch up with you, Mike, about settings, and I'm not sure how much I explained last time. We talked about this topic, but we put together, like Nadia and I put together an epic that just documents the UX issues, feature requests, bugs, enhancements, and the research for settings, which up until this point is not owned by any group. So this is, in a way, we're trying to push for some more prioritization and also trying to find a common ground for the design or redesign of settings. So in this epic, I have grouped bugs, features, and redesign efforts related to settings. Then initially, we organized, try to prioritize the bugs in order to drive the experience and the system usability of settings forward, or to improve that. But then in these calls, what I want to just try to understand how we can collaborate and how can we as designers try to understand each other a little bit and support improvements for settings. I think that's it. Any questions? Should I go into more details?
No, I think that,
Right.
I think I get it.
Good. Yeah, so can you just, well, talk a little bit about any previous settings type design work that you had in Create, or maybe when we worked together in the in CD, in release. So anything that comes to your mind that you think is relevant to this topic.
Well, I can go over a few things that we're looking at right now. I think would probably be the most useful. Not to say we haven't done other stuff before, but it was pretty, run-of-the-mill kind of stuff. Of, looks like every other settings. It's just another setting in there. I don't think nothing really in the past was standing out as super special. So we have a couple of things going on right now related to settings. I guess I'll start with snippets first, because snippets have been a weird kind of permission model. And that is because snippets were original. I don't know if they were originally, but anyways, the permission model is based off of the idea of personal snippets. So you have, like you're really the only owner of them. And then there's these other snippets that are project level snippets that are basically still following the same permissions as personal snippets, which is odd since they're in a project setting. You would expect them to kind of follow project level settings. And then the next layer of kind of confusion that's on top of that is that you set kind of the permissions for snippets, like in the snippet themselves. So it's weird that it's not following that pattern as well. So there's a lot of like kind of, this is how it exists. And I think if we were to redo it today from the ground up, we wouldn't do it this way, but we're kind of stuck now because this is how they exist. And there's ones that are out there in the wild, and it's kind of a struggle of what do you do about that. I'm trying to pull up the issue for it right now, so I can show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah. They don't have like a discussion, I think a couple of months ago, about how people were using snippets, right? There was some research around that, if I'm not mistaken.
We not recently. No, we haven't done.
Maybe that was, no, because yeah, we joined almost at the same time. I'm also going to Google that, but I think we have some conversations around, should we keep snippets, yes or no? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so here we go.
Yeah, I found here. Yeah, that was with Alexis.
So this is the one that I was talking about here. So we just recently did the design, or I just recently did the design for this. I think it's scheduled to be done. Let's take a look here. In 13.5, maybe? It's actually back in the backlog now. So I don't know when we're going to get to this. But this is what I was talking about, is that this is how basically project settings would work, right? Is that normal files and entities in a project file kind of follow the developer, maintainers, and authors, unless you're controlling them some other way, which has not been the case in Snippets. So we're talking about adding an option to make them follow that. And again, what makes these odd is, so if I go to my personal example project here, and go to snippets, like these exist. Oops, I can't edit this one. It's got a binary file in it. Sorry. What's odd about this is this exists outside of the settings.
Okay.
So snippets have always kind of been weird in that sense, that you kind of would have expect that to been in settings themselves, and there are, you know, some snippet settings that are there, but kind of what has made them a bit of an outlier and a little strange. And I think we would just pull them back into, you know, the normal snippet model, but again, these are out there in the wild, and you're going to break things if you do that, or at least, you know, you might change permission models and things like that for things that already exist, which I think users would find frustrating. So it's kind of what's making it a little bit more difficult. So that's snippets, kind of the settings there. The other thing that we're talking about doing for us is in the web ID, maybe I should just share again. That would be easier to just point and show you this here. So, you know, if you're in the web ID, there are some things that are very relevant to the web ID, like dark mode, right? If you want it to be in dark mode, there's various reasons why. We've found a couple of use cases where people actually do want to switch back and forth. You know, we kind of thought maybe initially this would be kind of thing you set it and forget it, but there are some use cases where people do want to go back and forth between them. So unfortunately, what we're looking at now is if you want to make the change here, you're forced to go out of here into your settings, into preferences, and then into your theme here, right? And there's a couple of other things that matter for things like that. So what we're talking about doing is maybe making those a little bit more contextual. So having a place in the web ID, probably first, although this applies to kind of all editors, all the single file editors across GitLab. But probably just the web ID first, of basically letting you set this setting, but set it from that. So we haven't done the design on it yet, but you know, maybe just popping up a modal that has these same options here. What we don't want to do is duplicate those settings, right? You don't want to have this setting set in two places. So what we're talking about trying to do is have where you can set it in the web ID, but it actually sets this setting here. So you would be able to do it both. And I think that's an important part for, I think that's we're using this one kind of as an example, but I do think that solves a lot of settings problems, is that, settings are hard to find, and there's various ways that I think we could solve for that. But one of those is, in a lot of situations, I think it makes sense to bring settings closer to the thing that they're affecting. And I think this one is a pretty obvious one of, if I'm setting the web ID essentially to dark mode, let's let you do that right there in the web ID. So we have an issue open to look into doing that here in the near future. So that should be an interesting one that I think that would maybe set a precedence that maybe some other teams could follow.
And that's super interesting, because when we looked into the themes, or like the most relevant topics or issues that we find in settings, it really goes around discoverability of settings, overall usability of, just the pages are not standardized, or buttons that appear here and not a page appear there, etc. But also the global versus item or menu settings or feature settings, because of certain features. And it seems so interesting to see web IDE there. You have to go outside of the context of the functionality to set up or to configure things. So it's really nice to get also this example from you, because from my conversations with the designers, these themes, they always repeat. There's always discoverability, global versus feature settings mix, this switch in the flow, and also, just general inconsistencies in patterns. So,
and one other one I probably would throw in that mix as well, because I saw it in CI/CD, and as soon as I went over to create an editor, started seeing there as well. I would say another trend is the group level stuff, right? So like, is this setting set at the project level, the individual level, or oftentimes we're finding that it's almost never set at the group level, but there is a definite desire to be able to want to be able to do that. So I would say that's another theme that in my travels I've seen, at least, and I gotta believe I hear it a lot, right? Group level settings.
Yeah, that's I'm actually working on something related to this right now with group releases and environments at the group level. We want to have the ability to manage releases across multiple repos or projects within the same group. That's definitely one of the current challenges in seeing what settings that you would apply at the group level that would cascade on the project level, and being able to communicate that to users. Because like what you're saying, sometimes it's not clear why you cannot apply whatever specific variable to your project, or because or you cannot edit a variable at the project level. So this there's some sort of miscommunication there. And yesterday I had a chat with Juan, and we came up with a very interesting topic on identifying patterns for settings and recommendations from a design point of view. Not only the look and feel of the components or the behavior of components specifically, but how would they, how could we provide guidelines for, I don't know, in pajamas or whatever, for settings, patterns. So on this topic, do you have any patterns in mind that you think that they work right now, or things that you think it could be improved or discarded that are in use for settings?
Yeah, I agree. I think we should standardize. I don't think that there is. I mean, it's kind of basic, like the design stuff, right? Matching the right UI element with the right item. Like radio buttons and checkboxes and single selects of radios and multi-selects of checkboxes and that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I definitely, if you look at the settings page, right, we're intermixing radios and toggles. And I think my least favorite thing of settings is in the visibility part where we have a toggle and then a drop down. And it's really the combination of those two things that is driving what happens in that setting. I personally, when I first started messing with settings on my own project, was thoroughly confused by this.
Can you show me?
Because,
Can you
yeah,
have something you write? Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that. I'm good. Let me take a screenshot quickly. That's very visual. Yeah. It's painful to watch.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what got me exactly. It was this kind of text right here was share code paste with others out of Git repository. It's interesting phrasing in its own right, but I didn't get the sense from this that I was turning off snippets, the feature. I got the sense that I was turning off the ability to share it, right? So I definitely think like this kind of pattern of describing its functionality in between the title and then the toggle itself is a little, it makes you feel like you're turning off that functionality. And I guess in a sense you are, right? But I think snippets is a good example of like, it makes you feel like you're turning off the sharing, not the entire feature of snippets.
Mm-hmm.
But also just in general, the combination of a toggle and this, I feel like you could consolidate those into two, right? Like,
Yeah.
or consolidate that into one. And it could probably be a drop down that is, you know, on for everyone with access, on for whatever the other one is here. Only project members or
Yeah.
off for everybody, right? I don't know that we need two items here. I think maybe the toggles are nice because they, you know, they're visually easier to see if something's on or off, but kind of feels like maybe we're overcomplicating this a little bit.
Yeah. And it's in the UI text part is also very interesting. I'm not sure if you remember the merge trains. We had so many issues with merge trains and configuration that people just didn't understand why or where and how they would be enabled or disabling merge trains in the copy.
Yep.
It was a checkbox, but you just couldn't understand what would a checkbox do. So we don't really have that in the as one of the themes that we've identified, but it's definitely something that is worth adding. Because I understand that we do have technical writers to review the merge request, but I personally have also problems when I have to understand the technical part of the settings, but then the language is just too, I don't know, it's just feature centered, you know, like, I don't know, even know how to explain. It's just too confusing sometimes to understand. So I'm just glad that you mentioned it. Yeah.
So yeah, I think generally, for me, I think settings comes down to two and maybe a third thing. The third thing's a bit of a blue sky idea, but I guess definitely three things. One, yeah, I think clean up the UI, right? Standardize on UI elements, and instead of having each section having its own personal design, we should just have, this is how it works. You know, probably an expand, collapse, and a relatively flat system underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would go a long way. I do think contextual settings are going to be very important. Just kind of see that trend all over the place. I think Android, if you have an Android phone, is great examples of that, you know, where My favorite example of that is like when you open something, it will ask you, do you want to open this in the app or do you want to open it in the web? And then it remembers that setting. And it would be impossible to find where that setting is in the, like, you know, amidst the million settings that are in the Android operating system. But so it sets it right there in the moment that I care about it. And I think we need to do that. I think like the web ID one, contextual settings are going to be big. And then I think we could probably reorganize settings and make them a little bit more streamlined. But I do think that that is going to only get us a portion of the way there, because I think we have so many settings that no matter how we organize them, it's not going to fit every use case. And it's going to be, you know, like there's just it's going to be one of those 60-40 things, right? Where we can we can reorganize them for 60% of the people, but we're going to alienate 40% of the people by doing that. And there's just going to be no way to solve that. So in my opinion, the only real way to solve that is with searchable settings. Like if you know, if you look at Slack or even VS Code and things like that, I think a lot of, like, once you grow to a certain level of settings, you just need to, they have to be searchable. It's just the only way I think that you can really navigate around that problem.
Yeah.
And then the third/fourth thing, I guess fourth thing, since I did say three, that I've been thinking about, like I said, that is a very blue sky idea, but being in the editor world, I am now, there's this very common, like, much like we have infrastructure as code, right? So your YAML file isn't a bunch of settings, it's essentially just a code file, right? It's a YAML file that spits out that. And even in VS Code, but like just setting up code editors in general, the trend has become like to have that not be in some database somewhere, but actually live as a part of your code. So the interesting idea would be here is let settings live as code, right? Much like we have infrastructure as code, let's have settings as code. It would obviously be a major shift for us and a huge undertaking, but it would allow you to standardize things across projects and things like that. So I guess what I would be interested to see is what that really solves is let your settings be your settings, and they can move from project to project, and they're version controlled and all that wonderful stuff. But I guess to see if that would be valuable or not would be, you know, are people having to reset the same settings from project to project? And is that a pain point? And if it is, then, you know, settings as code might be an interesting way to solve that problem. I don't know. I haven't looked into like if that's an actual problem or not. It's just something I see a lot in editors. You know, like VS Code itself is that, right? It's a JSON file. It gives you an interface to edit the settings, and I don't think we should ever go away from having an interface to set the settings. But what the interface essentially is doing is writing a JSON file.
Do you have an example of that, or do you have like any application that already does? Because we do have a lot of configuration in CI/CD that happens in both the CI file and the interface. So there's this like combination of, for example, I don't know, deploy freezes, where you say your project settings, I want to enable deploy freezes, but on the CI file, you specify the dates, or you specify for which, I don't know, pipelines or jobs are not going to be running. And one of the things that it's a bit tricky to solve, not tricky itself, but it's a challenge, is that when we want to do this configuration at the group level, there's no code base in the group. There's no code base outside the project context. So I'm just curious to see like what this settings living as code would look like for web IDE, where it's like, where does the settings for code in web IDE would live, or where would the user go, you know, if most things that we do at GitLab are, well, all code bases at the project level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think what you would have to do is, like I said, it's the both one. I think would be the only way to really solve it. So let me share here quickly and show you what I'm talking about. Just share my desktop, I guess. So if you go into, get this out, so close that. If you go into settings, and VS Code is, I think, is a good example for a lot of the things that I was talking about, because it is just like ridiculous in the number of settings that it has, and it has plugins, so it has to support like many different ones and things like that. But it does have search, which is nice. Um, so if you want to change something like theme, just search for theme, and you get all that. It tells you where it is in kind of the file tree and all that stuff. But getting back to the original point of being able to set this, so there is a user interface to set this, right? Visual Studio Dart and all that good stuff. But if you want, like really what it is doing is just, it's outputting this file. I actually don't have this one set up that it has this, but basically you don't have to set it. You could set this in the interface, have the JSON file or YAML file or whatever we wanted to do, and it has all these values in it, but it basically lives as code as part of your project at that point.
Gotcha.
Um,
It's like a, yeah, no.
and it's pretty common, like things like another example of this would be like an editor config, so there's like the age old debate of tabs versus spaces, and should there be 2 spaces or 4 spaces, and instead of engineers arguing about that, a lot of times nowadays you'll just include like an editor config file in your as part of your code, and then that editor config makes you have whatever 2 spaces. So it's that kind of same idea of settings as code, and might be something interesting to explore. Would probably be a huge undertaking. I definitely think if we are interested at all in that idea, we would need to validate the problem space first. And to me, the problem space would be, are we finding users who are irritated by the fact that they have to reset the same things across lots of projects?
That's very, that's definitely something to keep in the loop. Especially that right now we are only talking about setting via UI, and then having like an opening for this type of configuration, try to shed some lights in different workflows. Because yeah, our personas are 90% of them developers, so it'd be nice to look into that next to the different scenarios for these jobs to be done
Yeah.
by them.
Yeah, I mean, we're UI folks, so like it kind of scares me a little bit to think about settings as code. But I know this with working with the YAML stuff, right, and the CI YAML. I would dare say it's probably 2 to 1 of the personas that would much prefer the YAML file and to manage that as code than for us to have settings for that. Like we've talked a number of times about making, and actually I think Vidica is working on something right now for that, of making the YAML file kind of editable through the UI. But we've existed for years without there wasn't an uprising, is what I'm saying, of that living as code. And a lot of folks, when I talked to them, were happy that it's code and really wouldn't want it in the UI. So I bet you there would be, given the heavy developer persona that we have,
Yeah,
I wish a lot of support for that.
that's true. Especially like what you say in the beginning, that even if we come up with the recommendations, yeah, we will cover like what, 60-40%. Um, and there's so much complexity that it just takes more time to deliver in the UI. And it's just, I don't know, we've seen what happened to to the GitHub most recent redesign. If you screw up there, then people are going to have an opinion.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And again, that's why I think search is so important. I can't think of a large application that does settings well that doesn't have search.
So I sent here in the chat a couple of links. Well, I have more, but I just sent the ones that were easy to find about search in settings, search in general. So there's two big items that later today I have a chat with Catherine, and we're going to talk about the research that has been done for settings. But there's two themes. It's a search, like a global GitLab search, that you will just find anything you want there, including settings, not just what does it search for now, issues, merge requests, and well, issues and merge requests. You'll find everything, including settings, but also search on the settings view. So when you talk about search, is in both levels, or is really more like the global GitLab search?
I think it'd be interesting to hook it into the global search, but I really was just talking about like on the settings page.
Mm-hmm.
Going back again to this, to me, I think is a great example of this. Of I have no idea how to find anything in VS Code.
Yeah.
I don't even fool with this because it's impossible. There is so many, right? And each one of these has just forget it, right? You're never going to do anything. To me, this entire thing boils down to this search. So if I want to find anything in here, I immediately go to the search right at the top of the page. I think it is kind of nice that it does teach you. I'll do theme again, it does kind of teach you where it applies and what it's in, but
So it shows like in which sections theme is appears, and then I think that's the counter is for how many times, how many instances of theme you can find.
yeah.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, let's close this one. Open this one.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. We had.
I thought Slack had, but it doesn't, I guess. So maybe that is the one example of a place that's doing okay. But
We had a discovery open 2 years ago for search and settings.
yeah, we had and not even that long ago. It was a couple of months ago. It was right when I was switching to the other team. We had, I think you and I were having conversation in an issue about searching, and it was the feedback in that was very positive about support for it.
Do you know the name of this issue? If you find.
Yeah, I have it on my board here. Let me pull it up.
Another thing that I'm trying to do is to get the put all these issues in dedicated buckets so that we can see what are the different directions that we're currently taking for settings. So if you can also after this call, if you remember where you can find any of these links, just feel free to throw in this document or just send me in Slack or add to the settings epic.
Yeah, it was this one here.
Right. Yeah, I'm here. Settings.
Yeah,
Here.
I'll just put it down here as a bullet. Let you move it where you want. But yeah, I think this is where we're talking about. Yeah.
What's that? Hmm. Have to figure out where each feature setting is like Chinya. Hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's already in the in my
Yeah, I
epic.
don't remember the exact examples, but it kind of, I think this one was kind of illustrating the point that I was saying is that there's gonna, I just feel like there's a lot of things that are, they belong in two places. So if that's the case, reorganizing stuff, you're either gonna have to duplicate the setting so it can live in both places, which is confusing in its own right, because then it does it, does one override the other? You know, I don't know that you really want the same setting in multiple places. But you know, there's a lot of this should be in the CI/CD section. Yeah, but it should also be in general, right? Like, I just think we're going to run into that a lot.
Yeah.
The setting really belongs in two places, and it's just going to be an unsolvable problem.
Another thing that came up in the conversations I'm having with designers is this need to have, I don't know, just some entry points to settings in the feature pages. It's like what you're saying with the web ID. You can do some configuration there, but I don't know. What if you want to um, do some global configurations or general configurations related to web IDE, but that don't live necessarily on the web IDE space, right? And right now, there's no way, or I think it's very hard for you to find how to get from, I don't know, your CI/CD pipelines to go configure your pipelines. You need to go to the menu option. You need to know where to go in settings, CI/CD variables, for example. You know, if
Yep.
you're pipelines view. So that's another issue that we've identified. Mm, Users not being able to navigate throughout this, through these options in a consistent way, but also in a clear way. We do have a lot of copy, UI copy with more information, or go to the docs. But then Juan made a very interesting point yesterday. He said that even when you go to the docs, the settings information, or that one paragraph, the one liner that tells you where the settings page lives, it's just at the bottom, or it's like, it's not highlighted. So you also have touched on this, the entry points to settings, but also how the documentation could help users to, just instead of you have to read a whole page to learn how to configure something, just say at the beginning, this is where you go to configure this, and this is how you configure it.
Mm, yeah.
Oh, the merge class. Oh my God.
I will tell you one that gets me all the time, still today. This one trips me up. So every time I want to deal with like who has access to the project, my mind goes to visibility project features. This section we were looking at before, because it's got all these everyone with access things in it. And then a lot of times related to that, you're like, wait, well, who are the members of this project? And I will look through settings. I will expand and collapse all day long, clicking around here, because it's members, right? It's outside of this. It's not even a setting, but yet it feels to me like it is a setting. So that one is I have to remind myself of that every single time. And I think the fact that they're next to each other, you think would probably be better, but I think in my mind, it actually makes it worse, because I'm thinking like, I know where that is. It's in the bottom left-hand corner,
Yeah.
right? Well, I'll forget that it's in members, and I'll think it's in settings.
Can you go back to the previous page just so we can see again?
Yeah. Yeah, so you have this section that kind of deals with who can access it, right? Project visibility, public, and then everyone with access, or only project members. Well, only project members is members. So I feel like this section has no association with this section, but in my mind it does.
I got you.
This isn't technically a setting.
Because there's also no way for you to review in a way and say, here, I'm really toggling this off for the right users.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe, I mean, maybe, and I'm not necessarily saying that members should be a part of settings, but maybe similar to what you're saying, the docs linking to stuff and the application linking to settings and things like that. But I also think the settings needs to link to themselves as well. You know, so everyone with access, or like if I have this set to only project members, well, maybe I should be able to have a link, take me to, and let me see who these members actually are.
Yeah.
Oh, and I don't want to get onto a whole rant here, so I'll just mention it briefly. But this is one of my pet peeves as well: the toggle button that requires a save. I think this is actually against our.
This is against pajamas. Yeah, this is legacy, and this is one of the settings page that I think it's a little monster. It just grows in itself because it's legacy, and then we just keep adding more things to this view. Yeah. Just like the variables. If you go to CI/CD variables, it was redesigned by Dimitri, I think, a couple of months ago, and he removed it. Thank God, all this. If you expand variables, no, before you just couldn't fit any more information on this view, and you had the same problem. You had inputs and the toggles and checkboxes. It was a big mess. And now we have in a different context. But if you still go on this page, in other sections, you still see some of the legacy settings. Yeah, this one is an example. And I think below, not deploy freezes, we already moved deploy freezes, but there's something there.
Yeah.
One of the issues.
Little things like.
Yeah.
Center, right.
You know, this is all in the settings epic bug. I went through everything and validated the existing ones, and most of the UI polish UX dev issues are related to this. Buttons that are misaligned, or headers that have the incorrect sizes, and things that just look incorrect. But I think it's very difficult to prioritize this against, of course, new features, but also you need a PM and you need to be able to prioritize this in general, because now deploy freezes, we migrated, we removed the old UI to match the one on the top, to match variables. But with the other areas in the product, we cannot just go there and update the settings. I mean, you can if you have the time,
right.
But belongs to someone else, and that becomes a bit that creates more friction in the design in general.
Yeah. We do hopefully. I know there is talk of pages moving to the static site editor group and then consolidating those as well, but. There is that point as well, but there's this whole pages thing that essentially is a feature that lives as part of settings, when really this is not a settings page at all. This checkbox is a setting for sure, but the rest of this is not settings. It's how you manage pages.
Yeah, Juan also mentioned pages yesterday. It's the same problem. You have to still go to other section to edit, but then nothing tells you that you have to go somewhere else. Yeah. Good, good, good. I love these meetings. We get, I just get problems from these calls. No, but it's good to think of this, brainstorm a little bit some solutions, and also see, like what I said before, the patterns on overall inconsistencies. So if you can later on just yeah, just point me to some of these issues that you might, I don't know, you're grooming or that you have in your backlog or anything on Create that you think it's relevant to this topic, that would be super. Yeah, and just keep an eye on the epic as you try to figure out how to prioritize this. But hopefully, when we got to the point where we can choose a direction for example, if the, you know, what are the big things that we can solve in this search, for example, then we're going to start the conversations with the broader design group and identifying DRIs. That was the initial ideas to come up with these standards, or, you know, validate with users, talk to people, and push for implementation.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, and maybe one last thing. I don't know. I don't think that we'll get here because I think there's way too many other things to do first. But there also is like the step back from that of maybe a more consistent, holistic idea of like things that we let people set, right? I think there is a large variance between, in some groups, you are allowed to very much customize what shows up, and in other groups, very much not able to customize things that show up. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the nuances of those groups, but you know, just in general, like what are we even setting, I guess, is the question.
Gotcha. Philosophical questions. What are we even saying? That's an interesting point. Right. I'm gonna stop the recording because I gotta, well, let me just stop.